Isaiah chapter 58, verses 9 through 12. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry, and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom will be like the day. The Lord will continually guide you and satisfy your needs in parched places, and make your bones strong. You shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairers of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. And so ends. Is there any way to rebuild these ruins? To raise up these foundations, to restore these streets, especially when we consider our starting points? Have you seen these streets in the past 11 years? There is an overwhelming amount of pain, disappointment, and suffering on these streets, especially resulting from the ongoing U.S. conflicts. We can hear it in the voices of the parent, of the soldier, of the protester. And there are other voices too. How do we begin a partnership for healing when so much tragedy has occurred again and again and again? Reintegrate veterans and civilians? Who are we to believe that veterans and civilians could come together for the purpose of healing? Healing the deep spiritual trauma of war. Consider this. There are upwards of 2 million veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan alone. Less than 1% of the U.S. population, but they are joining the already 22 million veterans who are currently alive in the United States. Each of these brave men and increasingly brave women has both visible and hidden scars of war, such as traumatic brain injuries, post-traumatic stress disorder, and amputations, to name just a few. They also have a mother and a father, aunts and uncles, perhaps siblings in different states. They have worried spouses and school-aged children anxious for their return. They have concerned friends and watchful neighbors, and they are members of various communities. Communities aware of their absence and coping with their return. The clinical psychotherapist, Dr. Edward Tick, says this, that we are a nation and a planet of wounded warriors. Their offspring and their neighbors. Whatever joy or pain they experience ripples out, affecting all of us in its wake. They are coming, and they are already here. They have returned to an altered landscape. These particular 11 years of war has fundamentally changed us all. It has left ruins in Kabul, in Baghdad, and right here in New York City. Our nation is divided in so many ways, and we can see it clearly, sometimes most clearly in our institutions, where oftentimes we seem to reenact more intensely the conflicts that are played out in the larger world. I'm talking about families, I'm talking about schools, I'm talking about churches. We often hear talk of the polarization of society, But I've come to think that we've gone much, much further than that. We are witnessing an atomization of society, where every person is in it for themselves. It's a winner-take-all game for survival, and there can be only one. We can all recognize that something is not deeply wrong, and these roots are deeply rooted. The ancient witness that we find in the prophet Isaiah's message to the Hebrew people in exile, a people well acquainted with cities that lay in ruins, offers us some insight into how we might begin this partnership for healing the trauma of war right here, right now. And it begins with right practices. Right practice is a matter of life and death. Our Isaiah text occurs in a much larger passage concerned with ritual practices, particularly the proper fasting and Sabbath observances. In some ways, Isaiah's audience had it in mind that the prescribed rituals, if done correctly, were both necessary and sufficient. Sufficient to show their commitment to life and their covenant with God. In fact, Isaiah's audience was often forgetting the goal of ritual practice, the practices that occurred in these ancient temples. And it's easy for us to do the same today. The theologian, Don Schreiber, cautions all of us to be wary of this particular thing, harmonious forgetfulness. And this occurs when we emphasize the otherworldly aspect of Judeo-Christian tradition. And it occurs right here, too, when we overemphasize the highly intellectual post-Enlightenment traditions of Unitarian Universalism. The problems caused by the disintegration of war and wartime policies cannot be fixed without tangible efforts. And the church is not a place to go to forget the problems of the world or to simply lament its many, many troubles. True worship doesn't work that way. And it doesn't occur in a vacuum, and we know this. Isaiah reminds us, and we desperately need to be reminded, that genuine belief is demonstrated by caring for others. We need to go out on a limb. We need to reach outside of these walls, and sometimes reach within these walls too, to the silent members who are here. Another theologian, Mary Zolik, offers this explication of the Isaiah text, and I really think that you need to hear this. She wrote that to be in covenant with God is to be in relationship with one's neighbor. It is impossible to be in relationship with one's neighbor without being concerned for their well-being. In order to fulfill our commitment with God and with each other, we must be in covenant with those in need. The Unitarian Universalist faith tradition calls us into covenantal relationships. That's what we're about. And the Isaiah text is as much about partnership as it is about correct tradition. It is about partnership for healing, joint efforts in the back-breaking and heart-breaking work for justice that our world so desperately needs. It's not a matter of a division between faith and works, piety and action. Both are required of us. The world comes to life in the prophet's imagination when our faith inspires our work. Bones are made strong. Life-sustaining springs pop up out of nowhere. Cities are rebuilt. And this is where we find God, in our response to the hurts in this world. Schreiber asks a provocative question of us. For those of us gathered here right now in this sanctuary, he asks, what place can concepts like repentance, atonement, reconciliation, and forgiveness have alongside justice, law, reparation, and political interests. I look at the tragedies that have made headlines recently. We all know the horrific murders of the 17 Afghan civilians, mostly boys and girls, at the hand of a renegade U.S. soldier. And I look at the more recent tragedy, the murder of a 17-year-old boy, an African-American boy, in Florida by a renegade U.S. civilian. And my heart sings. I also look at the mother who cannot be consoled at the loss of her daughter. I look at the man sitting alone in his room. I look at the woman who, after 40 years, holds on to the rage and disappointment of the revolution that was delayed. This is a landscape. These are the ruins. Is there any way that we can rebuild these ruins? Can we raise up these foundations? Is there any way to restore these streets? Yes, there is. A service of public lamentation, a ritual of rebuilding, is not the only response, but it is an appropriate response, and it is very necessary. In this time, we can mourn the ongoing destruction, because that is a vital step in the process of rebuilding. We can recognize where we have missed the mark and recommit ourselves anew to restoration. We can acknowledge the divisions and promise to do what we can to pave the way to reintegration and ultimately a partnership for healing. That is the work of rebuilding, repairing, and restoring the ruins. And this is our answer, and the work that we are called to do with veterans and civilians tonight and into the future. It is also the work that we are called to do later in our families, tomorrow afternoon with our colleagues, next weekend at our congregations, and with our next door neighbor, perhaps next month. Let the rebuilding begin with ourselves, right here, right now.